Here I am with Jackee Holder, coach. There's so many titles. Actually, what
I don't like titles.
Well, no, but which ones? No, not being
I really don't like them.
But if you have to describe yourself, what's the ones that most?
I think coach is about being a human being, actually,
right, okay.
and being a human being with compassion.
Right.
And so I really find the title of a coach quite limiting.
Right, yeah.
But there is something for me about an author which gives me permission to talk about how am I authoring my life in terms of what's important to me, and how the particular communication method that I use to express that more authentically.
God, yeah.
And that is probably
so that one sits very well.
It sits very well.
Yeah, when you're being prolific in your writing, and I know these are just three. Your first book, Soul Purpose.
I love my baby.
Yeah, Soul Purpose. Well, that resonates with me because it's similar-ish title to my book, much later.
I think they are cousins.
Oh, really? They're distant cousins.
Yeah.
Hey, how about that? And then Be Your Own Best Life Coach. So again, that highlights, the career, not the experiences for you as a coach, and obviously being a coaching one of the first tranche of coaches really here in the UK, really.
Definitely.
And Write Yourself Well, which is your most recent book,
yeah.
Which I know is very dear to your heart. You said something very powerful in the first half of this interview. You were talking a little bit about your background from education, a real key turning point where you were really recognised in terms of your educational ability, went on to do A-levels and so on, doing various things, and then this moment when you got into youth work, again somebody had recognised yourself and your abilities, and you described this powerful moment whereby I think you had this session, this big room you walked in and you felt as though you could just be just the two of you in this room, in this very powerful transformational moment. And I guess that coaching, the impact of writing, and someone has this impact, doesn't it? So I want to talk a little bit about healing, because I think these books for me have got a lot to do with healing. This one obviously does. And Soul Purpose, about finding out who you are. But I get the feeling that there's something healing or soothing about this particular book. I want to ask, what is all of this stuff about to you? Because you wear these different hats, and in different ways you're helping people in their life journey. Can you explain to me a little bit about these different hats, whether the titles might be a little bit rough and ready? Coach, the interfaith minister. It'll be interesting if you talk a little bit about that, and about author. Tell me a little bit about these things and in what ways they help and heal people.
Well, I think it's very. It's good that you've used the word healing, because as an executive coach who does a lot of work in public sector organisations, in private sector, in the NHS and various other sectors like the arts, the common denominator that I find in my work as both an executive coach and a coach trainer and someone who does leadership and management training as well, is that what is required is healing. So glad
that I couldn't agree with you more, because I find that when I'm in those kind of settings, so much so, isn't it? There's a lot of healing in this, and it's interesting. There's a lovely then parallel back when you talk about your own story and our own journey. That I always feel that often the work that we do as a coach, that there's almost something that I often say to people especially when they're teachers and stuff like that. I say to them, it's almost as though we see people the 20 years or whatever later, after how they've been when they are in the school kind of thing. It's like all those messages, all those challenges often that people have, we see it there, whether it's that we're working people on their life, or whether it's we're working there with a team, or those issues about people not having been recognised and not necessarily feeling confident about themselves, or themselves being, they're not seeing their own magic, or they're hurting, or that they just feel as though they've been stuck and stilted. So I'm so glad again you used this healing. Did that surprise you when you began your career as a coach and then developed into an executive coach, that you're finding lots of people and there's this healing stuff that needs to be done, as well as the traditional goal setting and achieving this and managing people and all the rest of it?
Well, the goal setting's okay, but we have to understand why we want to achieve the goals, because often there is a need, there's a driving, motivating force that is wanting us to acquire or achieve particular things. So I know that often it's by helping people define what those goals might be, will help them kind of go underneath that to find out what really is the primary need that needs to be resourced, that the goal is is trying to achieve.
Right.
And actually the real work happens when we go underneath.
Well, that's great. Well, then at that moment, I think we've got to talk then about Soul Purpose, your first book, because for me that clearly speaks to that who are we and what is it, our purpose about. I love this title very, very much. You know, tell us in a nutshell, when did this emerge and what's that about? And I know you said this is a very personal book to you, and it's very dear to your heart, clearly. Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, Soul Purpose came about because it was written when I was in my early 30s, and I realised that my life mission was to find my soul purpose. Coming from a very traditional African Caribbean family, I was the first one in my family to go off and do a degree, and it was a little bit of a disappointment to my family that they could not say I was a doctor, a lawyer, a school teacher. I didn't leave the house with a briefcase and a nice smart suit. Mum would look at me going through the door in my jeans and a rucksack in my back and think, well, what was that all about? What was those 3 years all about? But I knew that for me, it wasn't about an external job, it was about an inside job.
Right.
And the inside job was about the soul, the soul finding its way and its purpose.
I like that.
And how it manifests itself in the world. And it actually doesn't matter what your profession is or what your occupation is. When I go into organisations and I'm working with an assistant director, a director, or a chief executive or a middle manager, actually when we strip away at all the layers, the titles, the positions, the money that is earned, all of those things, what we are actually working with the soul, the spirit, the energy, the essence of the person.
Well, I'm so glad you're saying that, because you know that's so my language and it so chimes with me, and it's great hearing somebody in all these environments saying that very, very, very directly. And for you, what for you did you discover, and when did you discover your soul purpose? Was it before writing the book? Was it during writing the book? Was it after writing the book? Or is it continually
Rasheed. It's continually. I mean, for me, you know, that was just the very start of my journey. Right. In my early 30s, I embarked on a much deeper spiritual quest to really try and make sense of the world and what it meant to me. I was brought up in quite a religious background, and there were aspects of the religious faith and traditions that I was brought up that I found quite confining, quite suffocating.
And this is a good moment then. We've got to then talk about this thing about being an interfaith minister. What does that, for those people who don't know what that mean? I get the sense is that you kind of work between, it's very much a broad church, if we even use that word, that it's about helping people navigate across faith and space where that people can be however they define themselves as a spiritual being. Tell us a little bit about that, and when did that merge?
You described that really, really well.
Thank you.
So for me, it's about interfaith is really about helping people define spirituality in what in the way that is personally defined by them and reflected in different aspects of their lives and maybe in how they live their lives.
Right.
I always get a little bit like, oh, you know, I trained as an interfaith minister, but what for me that meant was that I actually deepened my spiritual journey, and I have been willing to explore how I bring more of some of those faith traditions into my everyday life. And into my working life.
And how does that manifest for people you work with? How does that work when you're an interfaith minister? Are you asked to speak at events? Do you work with people individually? How does that work when somebody's trained as an interfaith minister and in the world with people with their own whatever's going on in their lives?
Really good question. So there are so many different doorways to being an interfaith minister. So some of my peers and colleagues that have come through the training over the years have set up their own spiritual practices where they may hold services monthly or weekly. They may run retreats. They may have a spiritual counselling one-to-one service that they offer to people so they can go through their own spiritual counselling. They may open events. I've been asked to open events. They may do, and what I primarily do, which I've realised is my, you know, my path is I sometimes offer services, so I might do baby blessings, which is actually my real favourite. I love doing baby blessings, planting trees, naming ceremonies. I have done wedding ceremonies and services.
Where people want something that's, I don't say neutral is not a rich enough word, but something that is more all-encompassing and that's not necessarily based in one particular faith, but with
it's much more
with
diverse.
spiritual,
It's got more in there. So you might have a poem by Rumi,
right,
read in a Catholic church, and then you might have a part of an African tradition
right,
as part of the service.
right.
But maybe you in a traditional church setting, or outside of a traditional church setting.
Right.
So a lot of if I am doing some kind of ceremony or service, I'm often doing it in a non-religious building or space where I've come together with whoever has asked me to do the service for them to plan it.
Right.
Over a series of different sessions.
Wow.
So somebody who was maybe asked me to do part of their wedding ceremony, I would have met with them and the person that they are going to be getting married to. I might have had 5 or 6 sessions.
Well, the thing that strikes me straight when you were saying this, I was just thinking, well, and I thought this several times, how on earth have you had time to do all of this work? Because I know that you're constantly working and doing things, because every time I send you a message, you're here, there, you're planning this, you're writing that, you're training this. How did you manage this? Because clearly, I mean, the thing is that, so there was your writing, there was the first book, you established as a coach, you talked about being an executive coach, working with all sorts of people, all sorts of organisations, not only then as a coach, but a coach trainer, and then clearly by the time you've written this book, Be Your Own Life Coach, you were a very accomplished coach, and therefore sharing all sorts of tips for people who are interested in coaching themselves, but clearly you established as a coach. How on earth have you managed to do all of these things? And I'm sure I'm not the first person to ask you this question, but...
you see my laugh.
Yeah.
People are always asking me
really?
that. I think it's a very interesting one, because you describe me as a prolific author, but if I could just say, if I hold up this book, Soul Purpose, and I hold up this book, there was over a 7-year gap.
Right.
And, I had a 2-book deal from my first publisher. They wanted a second book from me, and I went into meltdown.
Right, okay.
I had my own little process going on, where actually I wasn't prolific at all.
Right, I see.
And I actually, I don't see myself as having really allowed myself to be as prolific as I could be, although I feel that is different now. I feel very much in my flow. I'm like just really creating and putting stuff out.
Well, I think that's also the thing that strikes me, because I think that for me the prolificness with you isn't just about the things that are there published, but I know that you also always are kind of writing or journaling or what have you, and again, which leads to this. I always feel as though you're working something, and again, when you recently had the wonderful launch, and I must say it's a wonderful launch of this book, Write Yourself Well, and your most recent book, you were talking about all those almost like 2 or 3 other books that were in your ecosystem. So tell us a little bit about then this. I mean, this one sounds as though it says what it is on the tin. You're wanting to share some of the tips that you would learn and the experience for anybody, whoever it is that they could coach themselves.
And I wanted to make it accessible, because that's one of the things that I've noticed about the coaching world, is it can cut off certain parts of communities to access the services because of the fee structure.
Right, I see.
And I wanted to share some of the tools, techniques, frameworks that I think are making a difference for people, for people to just use themselves.
For them to use and that's such a good point, because I think that we could have a whole different discussion about that, but for some people it is accessible, some it isn't, and some people, whether you can or whether you're willing to make that investment, so it's great, that kind of contribution. And then Write Yourself Well, which is a different kind of book again, although it does have a relationship clearly to soul purpose.
Yeah, it does.
Tell us a little bit about this, and it says the science and wisdom of writing and journaling. And when you were at the launch, you were talking very deeply. What I got a sense of from this book was he was somebody who was sharing a huge amount of wisdom that they'd learned from almost, for me, I got the sense of a life of study. A life of study, a life of studying people, a life of studying these different modalities of helping people move further forward. Somebody who's clearly a very accomplished coach, trainer, and so on, all of these things. And then, from the spiritual to other tools and so on, and that you put all of this stuff in here to help others. And again, it's funny when you're talking about some of the stuff earlier, like pressing flowers. This book's got something a little bit, for me, then, of all of those, it's for me, here, at that moment there's a picture of a flower. So isn't it funny? It's almost as though, in a funny kind of way, in a magical way, you've kind of thrown all this richness of life experience, and it's in this book in an interesting kind of a way that there's so much of you and your journey and wisdom in this book. How is that true to say, and what's it about to you?
Yeah, it's a really good observation, a really good question, and I want to tell you a little story about this book. There is actually a huge amounts of stories that didn't make that book. They got edited out because one of the things that my publisher was sharing, that I made some of the stories too personal.
Right.
So because this is a book that was based on my lived experience, my lived experience of journaling, my lived experience of reading hundreds and hundreds of books on creativity and the process of writing, my over 25 years of being deeply steeped in personal development and my own spiritual adventure and discovery, it's almost like I've got material for 2 or 3 other books. I'm so thankful for that experience of having. I realised that actually, by saying to me that they could not make the final edit, they've given me permission. There is so much more.
Well, for this, how would you say? Who would you say this book for? Is it for? On the one hand, it sounds as though for somebody who's wanting to write and is feeling blocked or whatever to write. Is it that? Is it for somebody who is a professional, helping people in all sorts of ways, and you're sharing all sorts of tips and tools? Is it? For me, it seems as though there's so many things, and in a good way, that this book is. Who for you is this book most for?
Do you know when you're writing a book, when you're writing a book proposal, your publisher, you're always advised to think about who your audience is, who you're writing this book for. What's really interesting about 49 Ways to Write Yourself Well, when I look at the emails that come through, it's amazing who is using the book. Okay, so we can have anything from somebody who is in a senior management position, who is feeling burnt out, who recognises that actually maybe getting into the practice of journal writing might be a very sane way for them to self-medicate, that doesn't cost anything, that helps them to explore and unravel their feelings, gives them a sense of perspective and direction, and is actually a very, very tangible and practical form of emotional release and connection to themselves. To a text that arrived last week from someone who said, "Oh my God, I'm reading your book. I'm a teacher in a school and I'm using it to think about how I'm going to plan my literacy sessions with my pupils in my school, and I feel so inspired by the way the book is written, the way you've used the images," which actually was my publisher's ideas, but actually resonated with me because anyone who knows me and knows the kind of workbooks that I produce for. This is a bit where the perfectionist comes out now. I love images. I love things to look good. I love to have something that is in your hand. When I'm running a training course, please allow us to create handouts that are beautiful.
I'm with you.
People are coming already cynical, tired, worn out of seeing the same old thing, blue, black ink. Give them a bit of colour. Allow their visual appetites to be stimulated and engaged. And that's what I wanted to create. So, from some of couple of comments that came from my book launch was, I said to one of my friends, what are you taking away from? She said to me, "I've so loved what you said." She's my oldest friend, Pauline. And I said, "Oh, well, Pauline, how are you going to use it?" And Pauline's a previous, in her former life, was a reggae singer.
Oh, wow.
She said to me, "I'm going to write prayers."
Wow. So it's very powerful.
Very powerful.
Well, isn't it interesting that then, isn't it funny how our lives come full circle and how you can't, it's almost as though all of the different bits of us come together, but you can't single out any part, and one part falls into the next part, and it's all interlinked. I mean, it's extraordinary,
Because I'm realising now that where the work is just flourishing, I've suddenly realised the connection between the journal writing, which actually did give me an opportunity for my own mental well-being, my own emotional well-being. That's what the journal practice gave me. Now I've got all of this research that reinforces and reaffirms that writing creatively, keeping a journal, doing creative writing techniques has enormous impact on our mental, emotional and physical well-being. So now there's all this potential for where I can take the book in terms of the different sectors. If we look at the NHS, they're using poetry, they're using creative writing, they're using therapeutic and expressive writing to work with individuals, I hate using the word patients, around their healing, around their health and their well-being, in surgeries and in practices. If you imagine if everybody had a copy of this that they could either connect with at some point in their life or offer to somebody else who they feel would benefit from it, I think it would be amazing. And that's where I think the book is on its own journey. So
before we, as we close, tell me a little bit about, I mean, what's it you've learned from your own life journey, and what really for you is next seems in a way too small a word, but from here on in, because there's this extraordinary journey, like many people from modest backgrounds, found your own potential, found your own voice, helping others in all sorts of different ways, as an author, as an interfaith minister, as a coach, working in all sorts of different settings. What do you feel as though you finished your work? That's a silly question to ask you, but when I say that, but I mean, I think I asked that because do you recognise that you've done a lot of work? That's the first thing maybe I want to ask you to begin to. Do you see the contribution that you've already made? Do you yourself recognise that actually there's been a huge contribution?
That just made me feel quite moved, actually. Do you realise the amount of work that you've done? Because I think it is about when we're coming from a place of compassion and appreciation for who we are, wherever we are in our lives, we recognise that we are enough. And I think that has been really one of my major, most significant life lessons, is to understand that I don't have to be an Oprah, I don't have to be, at the top of my game as a coach, I don't have to have 10 best-selling books, but I have made a contribution. I
think that's very powerful. I think what you're saying there is very, very powerful. I say to people quite a lot, I say to people a lot, you've already done your work.
Yeah.
And I definitely say it to you because, my goodness, the contribution's huge. And I got a very clear sense of that at the book launch. But I also then say to people, so then everything from here is a bonus.
Absolutely.
So that you can, and use the thing about play at your launch.
That's the word I was going to use. For me now, it's like I get to play.
Right.
So I go up, I go to the library and I think, okay, what am I going to create now? So the thing that I'm currently working on is a book of writing prescriptions. I am so excited about them. There are these series of exercises that are around, you could have a writing prescription every day. You're feeling blue, you're feeling moody, something's happened in life. What's the writing prescription that will write you back to yourself?
Which is wonderful, which writes yourself well.
Yeah.
Wow, well, I'm going to leave it there because there's so much, and I think it's a lovely moment to leave because it points to all these wonderful things ahead. For people who are looking to find you, what's the best place for people to find you on the World Wide Web?
The World Wide Web. The World Wide Web is now the Oracle.
Is that right? Oh, yes, of course
Oracle.
it is.
So
Oracle, yes.
we can use it well because we're able to find our tribes. Seth Godin, love him for that book, Tribes, because you find the people that are part of your tribe in a way that we've never had an opportunity to do so before. So in terms of my tribe finding me, they will find me at www.jackee, Jackee, Holder, Holder, all one word.com. And then my newest and latest website that has been set up to support 49 Ways to Write Yourself Well is www.writeyourselfwell.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. I hope lots of people do take the opportunity because you're going to find lots of wonderful things. So it's been a real pleasure. I'm going to leave you to smile at the camera, and I want to thank you for all the work and all the contribution you've done.
Oh,
thank you, Jackee Holder.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to leave you to smile, and thanks so much. And enjoy those 3 books again.